Hollywood legends were built on films nobody talks about anymore. These forgotten masterpieces created the blueprint for everything we love today, yet most people have never heard their names. One silent comedy invented the car chase, another spawned every gangster film ever made. Time to uncover the lost foundations of cinema, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, 1920. This German expressionist nightmare doesn't just look different from every other movie, it basically invented the entire visual language of horror cinema. Twisted sets, painted shadows that defy physics, and a story told through the eyes of a madman in an asylum. The whole thing was designed by artists who painted directly onto the sets, creating this jagged, nightmarish world where nothing looks real. Director Robert Wiene and his team were working with almost no budget after World War I destroyed the German film industry. So instead of building elaborate sets, they just painted everything. Those iconic angled walls and bizarre perspectives, pure necessity turned into revolutionary art. The film tells the story of a hypnotist who controls a sleepwalker to commit murders. But the real twist comes at the end when you realize the entire story might be the delusion of an asylum patient. American studios initially dismissed it as weird European art house garbage. But when it hit New York in 1921, audiences went absolutely insane. Lines around the block. Critics called it the most important film ever made. Suddenly, every horror director in Hollywood was stealing its visual tricks. Those dark, angular shadows you see in every film noir, that's Caligari, the twisted carnival atmosphere of every Tim Burton movie. Caligari again. Even modern horror films like The Babadook and Hereditary owe their visual DNA to this century-old German fever dream. The film cost about 18,000 marks to make and earned over 100 times that worldwide. More importantly, it proved that movies could be art, not just entertainment. Without Caligari, we never get Citizen Kane, never get German expressionism influencing every major director from Hitchcock to Scorsese. It's the patient zero of artistic cinema, and most people today couldn't even pronounce its name correctly. Foolish Wives, 1922. Erich von Stroheim didn't just make movies, he burned through studio money like a pyromaniac with unlimited matches. Foolish Wives was supposed to cost $250,000 and take 6 weeks to shoot. Instead, Stroheim spent over $1 million and nearly bankrupted Universal Studios. But in the process, he created the template for every obsessive perfectionist director who came after him. The plot follows a fake Russian count who seduces wealthy American women in Monte Carlo, but the real story is behind the camera. Stroheim built an exact replica of Monte Carlo on the Universal backlot, complete with a working casino, hotel, and harbor. He insisted on real silk stockings for extras who appeared for 3 seconds. He shot the film in sequence, which was unheard of at the time, and demanded dozens of takes for simple scenes. Studio executives were losing their minds. Irving Thalberg, who was barely 23 years old, eventually fired Stroheim and recut the film from its original 8-hour length down to 3 hours. Stroheim famously said, "The director is king." But Thalberg proved that producers held the real power. This battle created the modern studio system where executives, not artists, have final cut. Critics were split down the middle. Some called it a masterpiece of realism and psychological complexity. Others dismissed it as an expensive exercise in ego. But every serious director studied it obsessively. Orson Welles said Stroheim taught him that movies could be as complex as novels. The film's use of deep focus photography and long takes influenced everything from Citizen Kane to The Magnificent Ambersons. Foolish Wives proved that audiences would sit through longer, more complex films if the story was compelling enough. It also established the archetype of the difficult genius director who fights the system for artistic integrity. Without Stroheim's epic battles with the studio, we never get Kubrick's perfectionism, never get Terrence Malick's endless reshoots, never get the modern auteur theory. The Gold Rush, 1925. Charlie Chaplin's tramp character eating his shoe like a gourmet meal isn't just comedy gold, it's the moment physical comedy evolved into cinematic poetry. The Gold Rush took Chaplin 2 years to make because he obsessed over every gag, every frame, every tiny detail, until it was absolutely perfect. The result was a film that proved comedy could be just as artistic and meaningful as any drama. The famous dinner roll dance scene, where Chaplin sticks forks into 2 bread rolls and makes them dance like tiny legs, was completely improvised. Chaplin was sitting in the editing room, playing with props, when he discovered the bit. He immediately called back his crew and spent 3 days shooting different angles of bread rolls, dancing. That's the level of perfectionism we're talking about. But the real innovation was Chaplin's use of comedy to tell a genuine love story and explore themes of loneliness and human connection. Previous comedies were just gag reels strung together. Chaplin created characters with real emotions and believable relationships. The scene where the tramp imagines Georgia showing up for dinner only to wake up alone hits harder than most dramatic films of the era. The film cost $923,000 to make, an enormous budget for 1925. Chaplin financed it himself because no studio would give him the creative control he demanded. It earned over $6 million worldwide, making it one of the highest-grossing films of the silent era. More importantly, it proved that audiences would pay premium prices for premium comedy. Every physical comedian since then studied The Gold Rush frame by frame. Buster Keaton admitted he watched it obsessively to understand Chaplin's timing. Modern comedians from Jim Carrey to Robin Williams credited it as inspiration. The film established comedy as a legitimate art form, not just cheap entertainment for the masses. Without it, we never get the sophisticated comedy of directors like Billy Wilder or the Coen brothers. Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, 1927. F.W. Murnau didn't just make a movie. He created a visual symphony that redefined what cinema could be. Sunrise tells the simple story of a farmer tempted to murder his wife, but Murnau filmed it like a dream, flowing directly from the subconscious. The camera movements were so fluid and expressive that critics called it cinema at its purest form. Murnau convinced Fox Studios to build an entire fake city on their backlot, complete with working streetcars, a lake, and a marsh. The famous sequence where the camera follows the couple through the city was achieved using a massive, movable platform that could support the camera and crew. They basically invented the modern tracking shot. The scene where the farmer walks through the marsh to meet his lover was shot using forced perspective and painted backdrops that created impossible depth. William Fox gave Murnau unlimited creative control and a budget of over $1.2 million, making it one of the most expensive films of the silent era. Fox told Murnau to make the most beautiful film ever created, and critics agreed he succeeded. The New York Times called it a poem written in light. It won the first Academy Award for Most Unique and Artistic Picture, a category that existed for exactly 1 year because no other film could compete. But audiences didn't get it. They wanted action, adventure, and clear-cut heroes and villains. Sunrise was too artistic, too European, too sophisticated for mainstream American tastes. It lost money at the box office and convinced Fox to stick with more commercial projects. However, every serious filmmaker studied it obsessively. Orson Welles called it the greatest film ever made. Akira Kurosawa said it taught him how to use camera movement to express emotion. The film's influence shows up in everything from Citizen Kane's deep focus photography to the fluid camera work in modern films like Goodfellas and Birdman. Sunrise proved that movies could be as artistically sophisticated as any other medium. The Man with a Movie Camera, 1929. Dziga Vertov didn't just document life in Soviet Russia. He basically invented the entire language of modern documentary filmmaking while simultaneously creating the first movie about making movies. The Man with a Movie Camera is a day in the life of a city, but it's also a meditation on cinema itself, showing the cameraman filming, the editor cutting, and the audience watching. Vertov rejected traditional narrative completely. No actors, no story, no sets, just pure cinema. He called it Kino Eye, the idea that the camera could see reality better than the human eye. The film jumps between Moscow, Kiev, and Odessa, showing everything from people waking up to factory workers to a woman giving birth. But it's edited with such rhythmic precision that it feels like a visual symphony. The technical innovations were mind-blowing for 1929. Split screens, double exposures, freeze frames, slow motion, fast motion, stop motion animation. Vertov used every camera trick imaginable, but always in service of showing the energy and rhythm of modern urban life. The famous sequence where the camera seems to walk around on tripod legs was achieved using stop-motion animation that took weeks to complete. Soviet authorities didn't know what to make of it. It wasn't propaganda exactly, but it wasn't entertainment either. Some critics called it formalist nonsense. Others hailed it as the future of cinema. It played in a few art houses in Moscow and then disappeared for decades. But film schools kept bootleg copies alive. Jean-Luc Godard said it taught him that cinema could be pure expression without traditional narrative. The influence shows up everywhere in modern filmmaking. The rapid-fire editing of MTV videos, the reflexive techniques of Charlie Kaufman's scripts, the documentary style of the Dardenne brothers. Vertov proved that movies could be about the act of seeing itself, not just telling stories. Without this film, we never get cinema verite, never get experimental documentary, never get directors like Terrence Malick who treat cameras like poetry. 1931. Fritz Lang created the first modern serial killer thriller and accidentally invented the entire template for psychological crime drama. Peter Lorre's child murderer is absolutely terrifying, not because he's evil, but because he's pathetic, broken, and genuinely sick. The film dared to suggest that monsters are made, not born, which was revolutionary thinking for 1931. Lang shot the film in Berlin as the Nazis were rising to power, and the paranoia bleeds through every frame. The city becomes a character itself, full of shadows, whispers, and suspicious glances. The famous scene where the killer is marked with a chalk M on his back was Lang's way of showing how society creates scapegoats. Everyone becomes a potential suspect. Neighbor turns against neighbor, and the police state grows stronger. The technical innovations were staggering. Lang used sound for the first time, but sparingly and with incredible precision. The killer whistles Griegs in the Hall of the Mountain King, and that melody becomes more terrifying than any scream. Lang also pioneered the use of overhead shots to show the scale of the police investigation, using hundreds of extras and elaborate set pieces to create a sense of citywide panic. German audiences were disturbed but fascinated. The film was banned by the Nazis when they came to power because Lang refused to remove Jewish crew members from the credits. Lang fled to Hollywood, where his techniques influenced every film noir director. The psychological complexity of the killer influenced everything from Psycho to Silence of the Lambs. Lorre's performance is the real revelation. He makes the killer sympathetic without excusing his crimes, showing the internal battle between his compulsions and his conscience. The courtroom scene where he screams about being unable to control himself was so powerful that psychiatrists started using clips in their lectures. M proved that cinema could explore the darkest corners of human psychology with scientific precision and artistic beauty. Without it, we never get the sophisticated crime thrillers that dominate modern cinema. Grand Hotel, 1932. Irving Thalberg took the biggest gamble in early Hollywood history by putting 5 major stars in one movie with multiple intersecting storylines. Grand Hotel wasn't just an all-star cast. It was an entirely new way of structuring film narrative that influenced everything from Nashville to Crash to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The plot weaves together the stories of a dying accountant, a fading ballerina, a desperate baron, a ruthless businessman, and a stenographer, all staying at Berlin's luxurious Grand Hotel. But the real innovation was treating the hotel itself as the main character. The camera prowls through lobbies, elevators, and corridors, showing how all these separate lives connect and influence each other. Greta Garbo was paid $270,000 for 6 weeks of work, making her the highest-paid actor in Hollywood at the time. Joan Crawford demanded equal billing, leading to the famous poster where all 5 stars' names appear in the same size font. John Barrymore was drinking so heavily that director Edmund Goulding had to shoot all his scenes before noon. Wallace Beery hated working with the others and tried to sabotage their performances. MGM spent over $700,000 on production, an enormous budget for 1932. They built the entire hotel on sound stages, complete with working elevators and a full orchestra pit for the lobby scenes. The film's success proved that audiences would pay premium prices to see their favorite stars together, launching the era of prestige ensemble films. Critics were initially skeptical about the multi-story structure, but audiences loved it. The film won the Academy Award for Best Picture and earned over $2.5 million worldwide. More importantly, it established the template for ensemble storytelling that dominates modern cinema. Without Grand Hotel, We never get The Godfather's multiple family storylines, never get Pulp Fiction's intersecting narratives, never get the complex plotting of films like Magnolia or Babel. It proved that movies could be as structurally sophisticated as novels. Duck Soup, 1933. The Marx Brothers didn't just make a comedy. They created a full-scale assault on political authority that was so savage, Mussolini banned it in Italy. Duck Soup turns the idea of patriotic war films completely upside down, showing political leaders as bumbling idiots who start wars over personal slights and wounded egos. Groucho plays Rufus T. Firefly, the newly appointed leader of Fredonia, who declares war on neighboring Sylvania because their ambassador didn't shake his hand properly. The film mocks everything sacred about government. Cabinet meetings become musical numbers, military strategy becomes slapstick chaos, and diplomatic negotiations turn into literal food fights. Director Leo McCarey encouraged the Marx Brothers to improvise constantly, leading to some of the most anarchic comedy ever captured on film. The famous mirror sequence, where Groucho and Harpo pretend to be each other's reflection, was performed live with no cuts or special effects. It took dozens of takes to get right because the brothers kept breaking character and laughing. Paramount Studios was nervous about the film's political content. This was 1933, with dictators rising across Europe and America dealing with the Great Depression. Studio executives worried that audiences wanted escapism, not political satire. They were right about the box office. Duck Soup was the Marx Brothers' least successful film at the time, earning only $1.6 million against an $800,000 budget. But critics recognized its genius immediately. The New York Times called it the most subversive comedy ever made. World War II proved the film prophetic. Its portrayal of ridiculous dictators leading nations into pointless wars felt less funny and more terrifyingly accurate. Modern comedy writers from Mel Brooks to South Park creators cite Duck Soup as the gold standard for political satire. It proved that comedy could be a weapon against authority, not just harmless entertainment. It happened one night, 1934. Frank Capra turned a simple road trip into the blueprint for every romantic comedy ever made. The basic setup, mismatched couple forced to travel together, bicker constantly, then fall in love, has been copied thousands of times, but never improved. Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert created the template for movie chemistry that every screen couple since has tried to recreate. The famous hitchhiking scene where Colbert lifts her skirt to stop a car wasn't in the original script. Colbert improvised it during filming, and Capra kept the cameras rolling. That moment of spontaneous sexuality was shocking for 1934 audiences and launched 1,000 imitations. The Walls of Jericho scene, where Gable and Colbert hang a blanket between their beds, created the idea of sexual tension through restraint. Gable supposedly hated making the film because Columbia was considered a minor studio compared to MGM. He was being punished by Louis B. Mayer for demanding more money, so he treated the whole production like exile. Colbert was equally reluctant, agreeing to star only if filming finished by Christmas so she could take a vacation. Their initial hostility toward each other created the perfect dynamic for their characters. The film was shot in just 4 weeks on a budget of $325,000. Capra used real locations instead of studio sets, giving the film an authentic feel that was unusual for Hollywood at the time. The bus scenes were filmed on actual Greyhound buses with hidden cameras, capturing genuine reactions from real passengers. It Happened One Night became the first film to win all 5 major Academy Awards: Best Picture, Director, Actor, Actress, and Screenplay. The sweep was so unexpected that Colbert was already on a train to her vacation when she won. She had to be dragged back to the ceremony. The film earned over $5 million worldwide and proved that simple stories about ordinary people could be just as compelling as elaborate historical epics. Every romantic comedy since then has borrowed its basic structure and rhythm. The Rules of the Game, 1939. Jean Renoir created the most sophisticated examination of class warfare ever put on film, disguised as a weekend hunting party. The Rules of the Game doesn't just show the French aristocracy on the eve of World War II, it dissects exactly how civilized society breeds its own destruction through politeness, tradition, and willful blindness to reality. The plot follows a weekend gathering at a country estate where romantic entanglements among both the aristocrats and their servants lead to tragedy. But Renoir films it like an anthropological study, using deep focus photography to show multiple conversations happening simultaneously in different parts of the frame. The camera moves constantly, following characters through elaborately choreographed scenes that feel like real life, captured spontaneously. Renoir spent months rehearsing with his actors before filming began, creating detailed backstories for even minor characters. The famous hunting sequence, where aristocrats slaughter rabbits and birds while discussing romance and politics, took weeks to choreograph. Real animals were killed during filming, which horrified some crew members, but added shocking authenticity to Renoir's critique of casual violence among the upper classes. French audiences rioted at the premiere. Literally rioted. They threw bottles at the screen and started fistfights in the aisles. The film was banned by the French government as demoralizing just months before Germany invaded. Critics called it unpatriotic and defeatist. The negative backlash was so intense that Renoir cut 23 minutes from the film and re-released it, but the damage was done. The original negative was thought lost during World War II bombing, but fragments were discovered in archives across Europe and painstakingly restored in the 1960s. Suddenly, critics realized they had completely misunderstood a masterpiece. Sight and Sound magazine voted it the greatest film ever made in 1962 and 1972. Orson Welles, Akira Kurosawa, and Martin Scorsese all called it their favorite film. Its influence shows up in everything from Nashville to Gosford Park to Parasite. Renoir proved that movies could capture the complexity of an entire society in collapse. These films built the foundation everything else stands on, yet most people couldn't name 3 of them. Which forgotten masterpiece surprised you most? And here's the real question that'll keep you up tonight. If these revolutionary films were ignored or dismissed when they first appeared, what groundbreaking movies are we completely missing right now? Drop your thoughts below. This conversation is just getting started.